and you should be able to see our weekly poll. So each week we start our conversation off, Megan and I, with a weekly poll. And last week we asked a question around where does account-based strategy, where does it really emanate? And it could be account-based marketing, account-based sales, really depends on how you're defining it. And the buckets that I used here in LinkedIn were marketing, sales, slash SDR, jointly decided, or other. And the majority, which I thought was a surprise, came out of the marketing side. And the reason I thought it was a surprise is the soundbite that I keep hearing is, well, we've been in sales and we've been selling ABM and ABS forever. But maybe it could be my LinkedIn network, or it could be just the words account-based strategy or account-based marketing. Maybe that kind of tips people toward marketing. I don't know, Megan, what's your perspective on this?
Would help if I would unmute. You'd think like 18 months into this, I would have had that sorted out, but never mind. So I'm not totally surprised by that one. I feel like a lot of, account-based strategies, when they put the label account-based on them, come from marketing. But John, to you and your network's point, right? Yeah, sales is kind of like, duh, we've been doing this forever. We've always sold to accounts. Where have you been? So marketing, I think when they move in this direction, I think sales can sometimes be a little bit underwhelmed until they see what the difference can mean. But I definitely still see it coming out of marketing. But I am interested to hear from our guest today, Gil Canary, because Gil, I think you've had a little experience with this. And Gil joins us. He's the VP of Digital Marketing from Genpact, and a longtime former colleague of mine as well. And Gil, you were sharing with me a few weeks back some of your incredible digital and account-based transformation story. And obviously we had to have you on the show. So super excited for you to share that. And I would love it, since maybe not everyone knows your company. Let's start, if you wouldn't mind, just sharing a little bit about your business and you and what you do, and catch us up on what you've been working on for the last few months.
Sure. Thanks, Megan. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to join today. Was really been looking forward to this all week. So for those of you who don't know Genpact, we're a professional services company, and we use a combination of technology and processes and people to transform businesses. The interesting thing from a marketing point of view is that we're your classic enterprise sell. Very large deals. They take between 6 and 12 months or even longer. They're targeted at very senior people in the organization. And what makes it really challenging and interesting from an account point of view is when we look out at the world, there's probably under 2,000 companies that we think are good customers for our product. And inside of those, probably less than 100 people. So when we look at the universe of people we're trying to market to that can actually influence or buy our product, it's relatively tiny. So when we look at the world, like Megan was saying about this poll, it's, our entire sales group, they're all account focused. Our company's account focused. And we like to say that, to us, account-based marketing is just marketing given the nature of our business.
Well, I think that's definitely true, right? And it's like the sooner you sort of embrace that reality. But Gil, I think, as you said to me a little while ago, you had to actually take this one step further, I think recently, when everything sort of moved from traditional in-person engagement to online engagement, and you were responsible for digital marketing at a company where you had this really traditional, large-scale, complex enterprise sale. Tell us a little bit about what happened and sort of how you applied everything you learned as a many-year marketing leader and analyst to sort of help them through that transition. Would love to learn more.
I will say that taking over a digital team in December 2019 was interesting timing, right? Because the company as a whole was built on a lot of sales engagement, a lot of marketing and sales. One of the interesting things about the company is sales and marketing work really closely together. But it was definitely a journey where marketing led off and then sales closed off. And there was a point where that wasn't possible. We all lived through this a year ago, and the sales team did a great job, becoming virtual. The events team did a great job adjusting to it. But in the end, digital had to pick up a larger role because we had to not just begin engaging the customer, but also carry it a little bit further than normal. And like everybody else, we went and pivoted towards a lot of digital media, which was great, but also a little challenging because digital media in an organization where you've got a 12-month sales cycle, you're never going to close a deal on, really on just digital media. You've got to get it to the next step. But how do you do that? When we looked at, ramping up that spend, there are two things that really struck us as being challenging. The first one was, how do we know we're even getting in front of the right people, right? That, as I mentioned earlier, our target universe of accounts and people is minuscule compared to the larger, B2B world. So how do we make sure we get in front of that? And then the second challenge that we had was, how do we make sure we're driving the right outcomes? Genpact is a company where we have a lot of focus on driving our brand and driving reputation, and also we need to drive revenue. So we had both of those. So when we started, those were the two things that, as a marketing team, we had to tackle. I had the great advantage of inheriting a really good media team. So when we sat down, we had to make some decisions. One of the first ones that we made was changing the way that we organized and aimed the media marketing. Because traditionally, like a lot of companies, we were looking at it from the point of view of, let's market to this geography, and this geography. And while that was a workable proxy for the accounts in those geographies, in the end, we didn't care about geography as much as we cared about accounts. So we made a pivot to looking at the world through our named accounts. We have tiered accounts just like anybody else. And we said, you know what, we want to make sure we spend X amount of dollars on the champion accounts, this amount on trailblazers, this amount on accelerators. And we made that explicit. What that meant, though, was having to rejigger the whole back end of the media planning to go away from geography, to go away from sort of the traditional ways of looking at it, to really making sure a huge chunk of our marketing was aimed directly at specific accounts. So that was a really effective transition, actually, and it worked out really well for us. And it doesn't mean that all our marketing is account targeted, because account targeting isn't perfect. So we still have stuff that's more broad. But we made a point of saying that, hey, let's target a chunk of this, let's make sure that we're reaching accounts that matter to us at least this much. That spawned some other interesting challenge, because some of the traditional ways of looking at spending, geography, et cetera, get a little more complicated, but we thought it was important to focus on that. The second part of that, when we were looking at how do we make sure we were driving the right outcomes, is really challenging in the sense that, the best way to measure media is to see if it's, when you're looking at it from a demand, is it driving revenue? Well, when your revenue's 12 months out, you can't wait, right? It'd be effectively like driving in the rearview mirror, and don't try that because it won't work, right? So what we tried to do was, for the demand point of view, we had to find a metric far enough up the funnel where we could see it happen fast enough, and it was happening in enough volume that we could make decisions off of it, but it was close enough to the end result that it was indicative, at least directional. And for us, we looked at it as, what's a good indication that we've got a chance to sell? And we settled on something that we called cost per named account session. What does it cost to get a visitor from a named account on our website? Because we consider getting somebody on our website effectively an at-bat. It's a chance to make a sale. May not lead to a sale direct, or we can't guarantee it, but at least we've got a chance. So we oriented our whole spend on the demand side to maximize that number. Now, we looked at all of the other metrics, cost per click, click-through rates, et cetera. But in the end, all things being equal, we had one number that we could look at. And I think the greatest thing that came out of that, and this is something I think, Megan, you actually said to me in a meeting once, you get what you measure. And when we started measuring cost per named account, the media team, the agency, our media partners, they were all able to focus on that number, and we were able to maximize that and drive that down. And we could tell, and we could see in the data that there's a direct relationship. The more named account visits we got, the more web leads we got, the more web leads we got, the more opportunities we've got. And we were able to actually, do some interesting modeling. We were able to do some interesting selections. But of the early decisions, I think that was one of the big ones, because it gave us that one metric that was meaningful and manageable that we could manage to, as we diverted a lot more funds to that. So
sounds like it's been an interesting ride, Gil. And just thinking back, I think I was thinking back to when I last saw you present, or first saw you present. I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, and it was on the web aspect, or the digitalization of the web. So it's interesting to see that that's carrying through to now. Just double clicking into your sales cycle a little bit. and thinking about that web piece, would you say you're doing one-to-one ABM, one to few ABM? Are you doing upsell, cross-sell, net new logo? Like, where are you focusing your efforts there, or placing your bets? And then I think Linda had a question about the website, which she was asking about how you're counting that account. Is it somebody who's cookied or completed the form?
Yeah. So let's answer that in two pieces. As you know, because the company is basically an account-based marketing company and we have a really well-defined list, we generally do all of those. When we tier our accounts, it's a pretty classic ABM approach. We do one-to-one for our, the top tier of our champion accounts, and then we do, one-to-many as you progress down. We, as like a lot of companies with the kind of deals that we do, we have different deal cycles. We have the kind where we're marketing to you as a member of that group, and it's more general marketing. And we have different efforts once you enter a specific phase of your individual account journey, whether it's a renewal, whether it's a new deal, et cetera. So yeah, we try to manage to a mix of that. And that's one of the challenges, right? We don't have unlimited resources. Where do you put it? And that's an ongoing conversation. Now on the website, this whole strategy of maximizing towards cost per named account really depends on two things, right? Can you find them? Can your media partners actively target marketing? And we're able to use a set of technologies. We use Bomora, we use man-based stuff. We're able to find those accounts reliably well. And then the other thing that you need is you need to be able to identify them on the other side. So we use a mix of, two or three different ways to identify people passively, right? We use the traditional IP tracking. We use cookies from some of our partners, but we aggregate all of that data and we use it to identify the people. We do a decent job of it. It's not 100%, but basically between the sample that we can identify and the projections we can base off of that, we're reasonably comfortable that we're getting, about 75% or north of that people identified. So,
So we've got a couple of questions. Specifically, I just want to make sure we cover off on that one. Linda was asking about cookie to counter someone who completed a form. And then Jay builds on that to say, what actions happen next? If you got those named account sessions, and I love the focus on one metric, love, simpler the better. But I think it's a great question. Like, okay, so what's next, right? You get them on the website, and how do you know? And then secondly, what happens?
Yeah, that's actually the part that, one of the learnings that I got out of this whole exercise is, I don't know if I'm going to date myself, but there's a book called The Goal that I read a long time ago. And it was actually a book about manufacturing. And it talked about how if you fix this bottleneck, at some point you end up creating one somewhere else, right? And if you don't tackle all of those, you're going to run into an issue. So that, we were able to drive a ton of traffic to the website, but then we realized, oops, our website needed some help. So the goal for the website at that point now is to make sure that once you get there, we can route you through to the next journey, including all the way down to sales form, which actually gets filled out a fair amount. And Jay, I think one of the learnings that we got out of that and we're doing differently is we're starting to look at another metric. Cost per named account is about here, the journey's here. We're looking at something called a high value interaction. Can we actually drive to something a little further up, which is directly a contact or an engagement with sales? Because that, there's a value to a cost per named account. There's a much higher value to that high value interaction. So we're looking at placing those metrics in other places, further up the chain in order to track that. But yeah, definitely doing something with that traffic is one of the challenges that we're dealing with now. So,
Gil, I had a quick question about you're aggregating a lot of technology and cookies and IP. How are you aggregating? Is that sitting in a data lake then to do analysis, or how are you stitching all that information together to make it useful?
Stitching is exactly the right word. Because, when you're identifying a mass of people with three different, technologies or four, you get in a position where everybody can identify a little bit of them. So what we end up doing is we end up building a giant master library that basically says this is their name in Salesforce, this is their name in Demandbase, this is their name in Bombora, this is their name in LinkedIn. And then you just have to put everything in there and try to get to the point where you can identify each of them. There's a little error checking in there, but for the most part, it's run every identifier against a pool of people and try and close down the number you can identify. So, but a lot of data work goes into that. So the tricky part is doing it in real time and doing it fast enough that you can act on the data. So,
yeah, we've had a couple of guests come in from the CDP space, and I think that's, you know, that's one of the ways people are looking at it. But that's a tough one, right? It's to your point. You can sure you can get it done, but can you get it done before the customer's moved on? I think is and actually then kind of related to that is Joe's question, which is what channels are your media team using to get to those named accounts that you want to engage?
Sure, we have the traditional, we have search as a largely reactive thing. It's there always when they're looking for stuff. We have a fair bit of, we have investment in both, all types of programmatic paid display ads. And then we have a ton in social as well. When we look at the way that we look at paid media, I have a way of slicing it that's, pretty typical. We have what we call inventory buys, these are purchases into the ad networks where they decide where to put it. Right. So that's where we just say, hey, here's our profile, go find the best place to do it. It's normal. We have in the middle set that we call a spot buy, where we'll work with specific publishers and specific sites, specific et cetera, because we want to be there, because we know our audience is there, or that brand has a specific, brand in the market. So we put some money into that. And then we have big publisher partnerships where we're engaged with them at a deeper level with editorial, et cetera, where it's not just, the media buy almost is secondary to the partnership. So one of the things the media team has to manage really carefully is across those three things, what's the portfolio look like? What's the right mix? And then inside of that, we try to use we use a wide range of tools. We use things like, we use a lot of Teads, we use a lot of Ogre, we use a lot of whatever's out there. One of the guidance that I've got to my team is I want them to be the people that publishers go to and say, we've got something new, let's try this. Right? Because there's a competitive advantage to being first out with some of these tools that as everybody gets into it, it kind of wanes. So being out there first is a first mover advantage that we try to maximize as much as we can. So.
John just posted a link to an article on hard-earned lessons on account-based strategy. And Gil, I'm curious to know, obviously what you did worked really well and you're seeing some fantastic results. Where did you run into resistance though? And what did you do?
It's weird because I don't know if I would classify it as resistance as much as, making changes. So, I think in terms of the organization, speaking from the digital organization, I think some of it was a little bit of the silo. When you look at account-based marketing, it's a journey, right? And the journey starts here at paid media and it ends on the website, and ideally it ends in an event, et cetera. So I think breaking through those silos was a big one, in that system-based, goal-based approach where you have to manage the flow. That was a big one, right? We have to make sure it works from end to end. In terms of working with sales, I think the sales organization, again, was already really account focused. And we had, when I got here, there was an account-based team that was already, deeply embedded in the organization. So that part went, was fairly easy actually, because marketing, by the time this happened, had already established that kind of relationship, and the nature of the business we're in, it revolves around deals to begin with. So a lot of it was structural. A lot of it was, getting an eye on the journey rather than the discrete thing you're working on, whatever your team was working on. And then, making our way towards a world where you couldn't just, go see a client or go through an event. Those were, I think, the big challenges. Again, it was a very interesting time to take on a digital team. So.
Yeah, I think change management's hand sort of got forced there, right? It's like, well, you don't have a choice but to change, so you might as well make the best of it. That can be an advantage when you want to accelerate different outcomes. But I think you also said you learned something about your buyer's willingness to engage online that you maybe, or that the company maybe hadn't expected.
Yeah, I think of evolution in marketing as not a slope, right? It's a stair step. And I suspect the change that we've seen now where, even deals of the nature that we've got, a lot of it is managed, online. That was going to happen. What the last 19 months have done is it's made it happen like that, right? So I think what we're seeing is situations where clients reach out to us a lot further down the funnel than we expected, like surprising me. Which shouldn't surprise me, right? We're in digital, but I'm still every once in a while like, yeah, that happened. So, we've definitely seen over the last year or so, a willingness to enter deeper into the funnel from the digital journey, more than I would have suspected, actually. So,
And
gotta-
are there, John, I'm going to let you go ahead. I saw you come
Yeah,
up.
I was just thinking, we were talking about websites, and you reminded me of a conversation that I recently had with a global head of digital in one of the big fours. And I've never heard of this approach before. And I'd be curious about your perspective about where web is heading and where ABM is heading. Most of our clients are more mid-market, so I haven't really put a ton of thought into this, but he said something to the effect of they were turning their website, because they've got a very narrowly focused target market, into something that's very, very custom for each customer, such that a customer would actually have to log in to get their web experience. So for example, Morgan Stanley comes on their website and they would only be presented Morgan Stanley content and Morgan Stanley relevant information. I've never heard of anything to that extent. Obviously, I've heard of personalization and the dream of web personalization.
Yeah.
Haven't seen a lot of companies pulling that off too successfully. The promise is a lot easier than the execution. But I'm curious, where do you think things are heading there, given kind of your digital remit and that narrow ABM focus of target accounts?
It's funny because, everything kind of comes and goes, right? Like if you look at the history of the web, there was a period where those customer extranets was all the rage, right? Everybody, when you would build sites because you thought you knew what your customer needed. And it's a workable solution if you're really, really sure that you understand exactly what your customer needs and you have all of that information. Because the trade-off between when you bound somebody's experience, the trade-off is you can really curate it. The problem is you really curated it. And if you don't understand that, hey, there's another part of Morgan Stanley, for example, that's got something that they want to buy that you don't know they want to buy, and you don't have it on your site, you're cutting yourself out of that deal. So I think in a business where you understand exactly what you sell and you understand your customers really, really well, I think it's workable. I think the risk is, you're potentially bounding their experience too tightly. So I think where a lot of companies in this position are going to end up is a mix of both, right? Where people really well, you can drive them to that. But the reality is, if you're selling to a company the size of Morgan Stanley or Coke or any of those guys, and you're a company with a matrix offering and you have multiple offerings, you probably don't know everybody and you probably don't know what everybody's looking for. So it's something that you have to balance where, hey, I know this part of the company, I'll give them something like that, but I've got to make sure they've got access to everything else. So, but yeah, it's funny to hear that because it's kind of goes all the way back to when the web first started. So.
Well, and I wonder too, does this kind of go back to our Serious Decisions Friends ideas about buying groups, right? And the importance of knowing what the possibilities are and then maybe even beginning to anchor your website around, well, who are they and what do they need, just from the get-go, right? Not even worrying about making it just for one account, but saying in general, what exactly. What are we gonna see? Have you adopted any of that mindset in terms of buying groups and sort of engaging and tracking them? It sounds like you've got that sort of built into your data strategy, but curious to hear kind of how you're deploying that concept.
The buying groups concept is one that we're exploring because it's tricky. The nature of the business that I'm in is it's very broad, right? We do services that span really the requirements of a large business. So, we look at the world from an account base, and then we start to try and figure out who they are from a buying group, and we do that in a sense by targeting audiences. Like a lot of people, we have a vertical focus and account focus, but then we also try to look at the world from a role point of view. The CFO, the CMO, the CIO, they all have different needs. So that's how we try to layer that horizontal targeting on top of that. And when you look at the website, because I think that conversation about what you say on the website is one that every company has to have. In the end, it's a Venn diagram discussion. There's a set of things you want to say and a set of things they want to know. And the art of a good website is making sure that Venn diagram is as efficient as possible. And if you're lucky, there's a big overlap. But if you're not, it's the decision about what you show. Do you show them what you want to show them, or do you show them what they're looking for? Where's that happy medium?
I feel like that would be a great workshop for a lot of digital teams, right? To say, what, based on the data, what do our customers actually gravitate towards, based on, where they search, what do they look for, based on what we know about their buying habits, what do we think they want to know, and then what do we have on our site? I can see that that could be an incredibly productive exercise, I think, for a lot of teams.
Yeah, my old advice used to be, if I can figure out your org chart from your website, it's probably not good.
That's a good point. Well, I want to make sure we leave a couple of minutes for anyone else who's got questions. We had a couple of great ones in chat, but who else has questions for Gil? He's got a great story here, so I'm sure there's good advice. And I see a few folks, friends and family here joining, so thank you very much for that. But who has questions? If you want to put them in chat, or just go ahead and go off mute too.
Hey, Gil. Joseph Fader here. Could you drill down a little bit into how your media buying team is approaching paid social?
Sure. Is there anything? So one of the things, so paid social to us is a bit of a secret weapon, because the nice thing about paid social is a lot of times you have a better idea who you're reaching, right? So I think we use it across the range of goals. So we do use it for a lot of reputation and awareness to get people to know who we are. But because it's very targeted, we're looking at things like, we're looking at some of the stuff that's rolling out, some of the in-mail, some of the conversational ads, because we think in a situation where you've got to reach a subset of people, that's the way to go. Because right? It's more expensive, but that's because they know what they've got. But if you told me, hey, you need to reach 30 accounts, that's probably where we'd go first. So the key is, I think with the best kind of social isn't advertising, right? It starts as advertising, but it turns into engagement. And that's one of the trickiest bits. How do you go from that initial, hey, I showed you something, to having a conversation, whether it's with the social team or the sales team? It's bridging that gap that I think is the tricky bit, because we still kind of see it as advertising. You want it to be conversation. So.
Right. Yeah, totally. Appreciate it.
And other questions for Gil? All right. Well, I think we're just about out of time. Gil, I'm curious to hear from you. Do you work with your product marketing team a lot as a digital team? That's been a hot topic lately, sort of the intersection between digital demand and product marketing, and making sure you've got some, good partners there in place. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to sound like a theme, but, when I got here, there was, Rob, the person who runs it, was great. And they've been a really good partner, because in the end, we talk to them at a couple of levels. The first level is, hey, what matters? Who should we be going after? What's the message that we can be carrying? And then also we work with them to figure out, especially on the website, what is it that people care about? They're a great partner in that they own the personas. They've done all the research. They know all the content. So they're a primary resource for us in terms of, helping us target, helping us aim, but also to get us the content that we need to actually deliver a message. So couldn't do this without those guys and the partnership that they provide. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's an untapped resource in a lot of organizations. So I'm pleased to hear that that's a partnership you've put in place. And for folks who haven't gone down that road, I hope they, strongly consider making sure they're engaging their partners in product marketing. Because as you say, that's another secret weapon, right?
Yeah. Hard to build a journey when you don't know where they're going. And typically the product guys know, the product marketing folks. So, we're always like, what do you think? So,
yeah, love it. All right, John, any final words before?
No, I loved what Gil just said at the very end. It is so relevant about that product marketing and journey. I'm talking with another client in an hour about that very issue. So yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. Gil, really appreciate you making the time today to come out and have conversation with us. And I think we have next week off, right, Megan? We're taking next week with the holiday, but then we resume in 2 weeks with Heidi Bullock. I think you recruited Heidi to join us.
Yes, we do. And Gil, you mentioned the importance of your data strategy and being able to make connections across all your different platforms and making sure that customers actually, are linked up so you know something about them. And Heidi's been leading the branding charge at Telium lately, but in general, she's just had a real gift for branding in an account-based environment. So excited to hear from her. about kind of her journey and some of the work that she's done. So we'll see her a week from next Friday, and hopefully everyone will have a lovely holiday weekend if you're in the US. And if not, we're just giving you a break next Friday.
Exactly.